Thanks for joining me on Global Lens tonight. We're talking about the arrest of Telegram founder Pavel Durov by French authorities. Telegram has said it is absurd to claim that a platform or its owner is responsible for the abuse of that platform. However, our panelists seem to think that if serious cyber crimes have been committed on your platform and you refuse to cooperate with the investigation into those crimes, then you are complicit in those crimes and you are definitely guilty of obstruction of justice, and perhaps, Durov's arrest is something that was waiting to happen. My question to you is, when something like this happens, is it censorship? Is it a violation of free speech by governments? Or is it necessary enforcement of accountability? Where does the buck stop, according to you?
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. I think there's a lot in the series of questions you asked. So we have to decouple quite a few things, and there's a lot going on here. So first of all, let's talk about the concept about free speech, right? So free speech is not absolute, right? It has to operate within the legal framework and the structure and system where it operates, right? Because the moment the free speech starts having a public safety implication, then someone has to come in and curtail some part of it, and that usually is the regulatory body or the government in that country, right? So there has to be a balance between free speech and also public safety, right? So that is also one thing we have to understand. Second is, you talked about moderation. So moderation has to be accompanied by, I would say, transparency, right? So if you are asking something to be moderated or asking someone to moderate something who has the power, there has to be a transparent set of principles saying, what things will be moderated and how, and who will moderate it, and what things won't be moderated, right? The more objective the list is, the better, because otherwise, these things can be abused as well to prevent a narrative that is not in your favor, and that would come in the way of free expression of opinion, right? The third implication of what you're saying is, okay, who is really responsible, right? Let's assume that this is something which was impacting public safety. Let's assume that the moderation principles were very transparent, and even then it was not done. So then it becomes like a sort of I would say, whose liability it is and who should be punished, right? So typically, it's a corporate entity. The liability falls on the company to do it, and I think they can be fined, they can be brought to justice, whatever is the local law should apply to them, and not to their officials, right? And because officials are sort of the employees of the company, and the liability is of the company. Now, here also, there has to be a bit of a nuance here that, okay, if the official has not, I would say, cooperated, and that official had knowledge, so as a citizen, they should have cooperated in that country and should have been sort of the person who should have given all the relevant information to the law enforcement agency, then of course you can also bring them to justice, right? So that's the question to think about. Also, the way this has been done, I think it sort of became more like a high-profile arrest. So what I can't comment on is that, okay, was due notice given? Durov was asked to sort of volunteer some information. Did he refuse it? And as a extreme measure, then he has been arrested to give that information. So that has to be also looked into it. So there are a couple of things to it. Just to summarize, of course, there has to be a balance between free speech and public safety. Second, there has to be a balance between content moderation and transparency. And third, has to be a balance between, where do you fix the liability and how do you then enforce the liability? I think we have to analyze it at 4 levels.
How do you enforce liability, I think, is perhaps the most critical question at the heart of this debate. Manish, let me ask you this. When you talk about very serious crimes like money laundering, terror financing, child sexual abuse, drug trafficking, there is no doubt that a stringent action needs to be taken, because this is, after all, about the safety of people, of our citizens. But would you not agree that there have been multiple instances where governments have put pressure on social media platforms simply for, for allowing an alternative opinion, let's say unfavorable to the government, a showcase? Now, that is where the problem lies. That is where the lines blur. That is where allegations of censorship come in. We might say that authoritarian governments do it, but let's face it, it's also happening in democracies around the world.
Yeah. So that is where good process is needed, right? I mean, clearly you need to have a process where you define, you know, what is the process to take down a piece of content, right? And that is where a distinction between a platform and a publisher comes into play, right? If if someone is a publisher, that means they own the content and they are the one who is producing that content, and therefore they have a bigger liability to ensure that the content being published is correct and is not causing public harm. On the other hand, if you're a platform where you are not producing content, where others are producing and putting content, then I think the framework is very different. That is where I think it comes to the point of saying, okay, if someone points it out to us, we will take it down, provided what you point it out to us is not legal or is should not be there, right? Now, clearly, every government in every country wants to sort of stay in power, and they want to make sure that the narrative is in their favor. And to the extent they can, they try their luck. And it depends also on the platforms, how they manage that process, because different platforms have different policies. But ultimately, in most democratic countries, there is a very strong distinction between the executive body of the government as well as the legal system and the judicial system and the law enforcement agencies. I mean, so it seems to work out. Of course, there are issues everywhere, but I would say that by and large, that is the independent and having a transparent process is the key.
Okay, let me ask you this question. You know that, the Indian government has had a few run-ins as well with some social media platforms, from Twitter, which is now X, to WhatsApp. WhatsApp, for instance, was asked to share, even encrypted messages, something that WhatsApp refused to do. Now, governments a lot of times do these things in the name of national security, but unfortunately, we also see that definition being stretched at times. You have been the head of Twitter India. I would love for you to share with us some of your experiences, Manish. How challenging is it to run a big tech company like Twitter, now X, or Meta for that matter, in this era?
Yeah. So clearly, I won't go into specific, but I can tell you this that, see, most technology companies, right, they have been built on user trust, right? So why people are comfortable sharing something on, say, YouTube or Instagram or Twitter is because they know that it's a platform for free expression. They can be themselves. They can express their opinion. And I mean, people will not come after them personally or criminally unless they do something which is illegal, right? And sort of there is also that belief that this will happen this way. Plus, many of the platforms also promise anonymity and pseudonymity, right? For example, you can publish content without revealing your identity because you want to express yourself, but you also feel that there might be a like a retaliation, so you don't want to express your true identity. Now, on one side, that is good because it gives you that power of expression, but it can also be misused by bad actors in the ecosystem. Now, most of these companies are built on the premise that we have to serve the user, ensure privacy, ensure free expression. But the challenge happens that while the intent is not there to harm anyone, we do see bad actors doing things that are not right. Now, then the question becomes, what is the role of a social media platform? And that's a tough question to ask because if we define the role of a social media platform to be a publisher and scrutinize every piece of content and take down what is not legal or what is not correct, these platforms cannot run and these platforms cannot operate because they will have tremendous legal liability there. And therefore, this entire platform business will not be there. And so citizens will be deprived of a mechanism to express themselves. So think about this like a public square. It's a public square. In a public square, anyone can say anything. But of course, there are some basic principles that apply that, okay, I should not cause a public safety impact, even if I'm in a public square. That's how you look at it. Now, over a period of time, what has happened is that people have realized that you need to have some safety norms. You can't just have an absolute free speech. So started with because of that, some safety norms have come into picture. For example, if there is any content about terrorism or child sexual exploitation or anything to cause explicit harm, there are tools that have been created to fix those or to move them down because there are some learning techniques that have been implemented. But see, nothing is foolproof and the new ways of harm keeps coming up. So it's basically, people are just, figuring things out here, right? So that's where situation is, right? And most platforms are saying that we are a platform, not a publisher. So you tell us what is wrong if there's a legal order or a court order, we will gladly take it down. And that's where I think that's they operate. Uh, so that's where I would say that because of that, things work out, but it works out in a very convoluted fashion. And many times, some people feel that, hey, some content is not right and should not be there. But the question is, who decides what is not right? I mean, if it has to be a competent authority, and say you gave the example of India, the competent authority would be a court order or a judicial system because they can interpret the law and say, okay, this is incorrect and this is illegal. So then you can say, bring it down. Now,
Can
that
I
is a
give you an
long and arduous
example,
process,
Manish?
and it does
Because
happen that
you've
way.
raised a very pertinent question. Who decides what is harmless content and what is harmful content? This question often comes up in the context of hate speech. Let's talk about the farmers' protest that rocked this country a couple of years ago. Now, the government said on multiple occasions that a lot of Twitter handles at the time were promoting quote unquote Khalistani agenda with the intent to, incite unrest in India. And then there were government critics who said these are legitimate voices of dissent that have as much right to be heard as the government. So in a situation such as that, when a platform such as Twitter comes under pressure from the government and also equally from civil society, members of whom may be critical of the government, what is the right thing to do? What is the way forward?
Yeah, no, I think you asked a very good question. It's a tough situation that social media platforms find themselves in, right? For example, no one wants to break the law and no one wants to cause unrest, right? But the question is, how do you know which side is correct? And that's a tough situation because ultimately your goal is to give expression to people and let people have a public square where they can express themselves. So on one side, if you have someone saying, okay, this is not right because it goes against what we believe is a wrong agenda. And on the other side, you have a different party. So you are basically caught in crosshairs. So typically what social media platforms would do in that situation is that, of course, they will check the law. And if it is clearly illegal, then that would be brought down. If it's a gray area, then they will look at community guidelines. For example, they will look at guidelines about like what are the things not allowed in the community discussions, and they will try to moderate content there. And these are guidelines which are transparently published on their website saying what is allowed, what is not allowed. And the third level is that if still it's not clear that they are neither illegal nor they violate the community norms and the terms of service, then ideally they should wait for a legal competent authority to tell them to bring it down. And competent authority has to be defined by the state, right? For example, in many countries, it is the judicial system that tells them that, okay, this is violating the following statute, and therefore you should bring it down, and then they follow it. Or if there is a circular or a notification from a competent legal authority or government authority, and if it is not allowed as per that circular, then they will follow
Trouble
that.
with that
Now,
though is,
if something is
our
not illegal, something is not community
yes.
norm, something is not decided by the court, then what is the basis to bring something down? Then
It's,
becomes a
it's
bit of a
very
challenge
tricky.
because
You see, because
then you
the
are getting into
judiciary in
aggression.
this country is already very overburdened, Manish. How many tweets are you going to take to the courts? How many Facebook
Agree. I mean,
posts are you
agree.
going to take to
Yeah.
the courts? These are very long, drawn-out processes, and social media is all about the here and now, and therefore that really is a very tricky part. But before we let you go, Manish, are you by any chance in any mood to spill the beans on whether you faced any government pressure as head of Twitter India?
I will skip that question. I think that's something we will talk some other time. But I think I would just say that, see, my heart goes out to everyone who tries to do good things, but at the same time, it's a tough situation to be in, right? I mean, like you are dealing with something very, very important, and also at the same time, you carry the burden of upholding people's trust, but you also want to be law-abiding. You want to follow all the rules and norms. So often social media platforms fall in the crosshairs of this discussion.
Okay.
Now, I don't know the specifics of the case with Durov and the Telegram's founder who just got arrested. I just hope that a due legal process is followed, and if he has been given proper notice and he has chosen not to comply, he has chosen to not cooperate, then probably he should be subject to a personal liability and criminal persecution. But if not, I mean, we should we should use this opportunity to figure out how the system can be improved and what can be done better to make this whole messaging ecosystem even better than what it is today. Clearly, we see a lot of value because people can message anyone. There's a lot of privacy and
Yes.
encryption, and we feel very comfortable messaging. at the same time, I do agree that it has become the battle, like it has become a place where a lot of illegal and criminal activities also happen. So the question is, how do you stop that? Like, do you start snooping on every message? Is that the right answer?
Yeah.
How do you know prima facie that something is wrong until the crime is committed? Should you not let anything happen? Should you just shut down everything? Like, that's a bigger question. Like, I mean, should we
Yes.
deprive ourselves of this tool?
We are, after
Or
all,
do
in
we
the
have the tool?
digital
Then
media.
how do you manage this tool better? And there's no one has an
Absolutely.
answer. I think we all have to figure out as
There,
humanity and as
there is
community.
no one clear or easy answer to this.
Yeah.
Also, another question for which maybe we'll get you on another show is whether the government can really be the final arbiter on what can be showcased on a platform and what cannot. When it comes to serious crimes, yes, government agencies will kick in, but then again, when it's a matter of opinion, can the government really be the final arbiter of that?